I'm Phil Lipoff. Thanks so much for streaming with us today on ABC News Live. The latest January 6th hearing on Capitol Hill scheduled to begin in just a short time from now. What to expect from today's hearing and new details on what committee members call a pressure campaign against former Vice President Mike Pence. Also ahead, the dramatic U.S.-led military raid that captured a top ISIS leader, while coalition officials say the accused bomb maker and facilitator posed a serious threat. Plus, COVID shots one step closer to becoming available for 18 million American children. What parents need to know about the vaccines for kids as young as 6 months of age. But we begin with the House January 6th committee set to hold its third hearing today. They are expected to focus on former President Trump's pressuring his vice president, Mike Pence, to refuse to count certified electoral votes. Chief Washington correspondent John Carl has the latest from Capitol Hill.
The photos from January 6th that you've never seen, obtained exclusively by ABC News. Vice President Mike Pence just whisked off the Senate floor by the Secret Service, huddles with his brother and his daughter, the fear visible on her face. Second Lady Karen Pence is seen closing the curtains as the mob of rioters storms the Capitol, fearing they would see her husband. Minutes later, Pence and his family were taken to a loading dock beneath the Capitol complex. Late that night, tweeting these pictures with the Capitol Police. During the siege, the crowd of Trump supporters was searching for Pence after he rebuffed Donald Trump's demand that he attempt to overturn the 2020 election. The January 6th committee's Republican vice chair says they will prove that Trump agreed with those trying to get Pence.
The president responded with this sentiment, quote, "Maybe our supporters have the right idea. Mike Pence, quote, deserves it."
Trump denied that after the committee's first hearing, but listen to what he told me just 2 months after the Capitol attack.
No,
you heard those chants. That was terrible. I mean, those,
he could have. Well, the people were very angry.
They're saying, "Hang Mike Pence."
Because it's common sense, John. It's common sense that you're supposed to protect. How can you, if you know a vote is fraudulent, right?
Yeah.
How can you pass on a fraudulent vote to Congress?
But the vote wasn't fraudulent, and Pence's role in certifying the election was only ceremonial. Trump's White House lawyers, aides, and Pence himself had told Trump that.
President Trump is wrong. I had no right to overturn the election.
Trump ignored all of them and launched an all-out pressure campaign against Pence, even issuing this warning the day of the attack.
Mike Pence is going to have to come through for us, and if he doesn't, that will be a sad day for our country, because you'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength, and you have to be strong.
After the Capitol was cleared that night, Pence returned. This picture showing him working with his daughter on the speech that he would give as Congress reconvened to certify Joe Biden's victory.
To those who wreaked havoc in our Capitol today, you did not win. Violence never wins. Freedom wins. And this is still the people's house.
Pence himself won't be testifying today. He actually has an event in Ohio as this committee hearing is getting underway. But he has given a green light to his top advisors to cooperate with the committee, and we will hear from several of them in both live and recorded testimony today. Phil?
John Carl, thanks so much. Let's get into this a bit more now as we bring in White House correspondent Mary Ellis Parks and attorney Jeff Robbins, the former chief minority counsel at the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, as well as our ABC News contributors, former Republican Congresswoman Barbara Comstock of Virginia and Amanda Renteria, the former national political director for Hillary Clinton's 2016 campaign. Thank you all for joining us. Mary Alice, let's start with you. Congresswoman Liz Cheney teased testimony to come up of Trump's awareness of rioters saying, "Hang Mike Pence." Can we expect to hear more about that today, and what kind of impact do you think that has?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, the vice chair of the committee, Liz Cheney, teased at the last hearing that they had evidence that the president said something to the effect of maybe he deserves it when asked and told about the idea that the rioters were specifically chanting "Hang Mike Pence," that they were specifically targeting his own vice president. I think that this committee is really interested in laying out that not only did the former president know that Pence was in danger, but that he chose not to do anything about it. A big part of what they've been looking at and what they say they found evidence of is that the president didn't didn't make calls, didn't pursue any avenues to try to stop the rioters, to try to instill order again on this building.
Jeff, Representative Cheney, as you heard Mary Alice just point out, says Trump reacted to those chants by saying maybe he deserves it. If that is an accurate depiction, what does that say about Trump's state of mind on January 6th, and how significant could it be, say, from a legal standpoint?
You know, there's so much evidence of a corrupt state of mind when it comes to the former president's conduct on that day that it's hard to know what to choose from. Here's what Mike Pence had better come through for us means. It means that the then president, instructed his vice president, quite literally, to not count the electoral votes as he was required to do under the Constitution and under federal law, so that he could stay in power, notwithstanding the fact that Joe Biden had been deemed to be the victor in the election. If that isn't evidence of corruption and dishonesty, where he had been advised that there was absolutely no legal basis whatsoever for having that occur, I don't know what would be.
Barbara, Pence's chief of staff testified that the former vice president knew the oath he took, his fidelity to the Constitution, came first and foremost over his loyalty to former President Trump. How has that decision come to define Mike Pence, good or bad, in his future with the Republican Party, already walking a political tightrope? As his aides testify today, he's out in Ohio giving a speech.
Well, I think history will reward him, even if politics don't. And we're going to hear, from his counsel today, who's going to say, from the beginning he understood he couldn't do that. But I think it's going to be very powerful to hear from Judge Ludig, who has long been a conservative constitutional scholar and judge, revered by those of us in the Federalist Society. He's a friend, but very serious and sober judge who is considered for the Supreme Court by George Bush, and I believe perhaps by Donald Trump himself. And so this is I think his testimony is very powerful. I recommend everyone read it and listen to it today, because this is who Mike Pence turned to, because he knew this was somebody who was serious and sober, who knew actually John Eastman clerked for him. So John Eastman clerked for Judge Ludig, and Judge Ludig slaps this down, puts it directly in his testimony at the feet of Donald Trump, that Donald Trump was directing this. This wasn't just people coming to him with crazy ideas. He was seeking out those ideas, and he definitely wanted Mike Pence to take actions that were illegal, unconstitutional, and would cause a crisis in our democracy that is still ongoing. And the death threats that Mike Pence got, that Trump not only confirmed, that day that, hey, maybe he deserves it, what he said to Jonathan Karl is exactly in that same line of thinking. And what he said to Kevin McCarthy on that day when he said, hey, Kevin, maybe they're more upset than you are about this. While it was going on, while the riots were going on, he waited 3 hours and did not care, even when told. Dereliction of duty. I think this clearly lays out, I think Judge Ludig lays out a case for criminal conduct that this Justice Department should investigate.
And Amanda, just finally, the previous hearings have featured recorded testimony. If folks have been watching from Trump's inner circle, we saw his daughter Ivanka testify, her husband Jared. What are you watching for today?
I think continuing to build out the story, but it is really important, this direct action by Trump, and really seeing it's not just that he didn't do anything, it was that he was actively using the power of the presidency to apply pressure on those around him. And what we are hearing time and time again as more facts get revealed is how much friends, supporters, colleagues were trying to get him to do something different. And he himself chose to actually lean in a different way. Not only do we hear it on the stage the day of, but behind the scenes as well. And that piece is equally important because you're beginning to not only define history of who was on what side at that key moment of our country's history, but what Trump himself was doing to actually drive this proactively. And that part of it is an important piece here.
All right, all eyes on the hearing today. Amanda Renteria, Barbara Comstock, Jeff Robbins, and of course, Mary Ellis Parks. Thank you all so much. And we will have full team coverage of today's hearing beginning at 1 p.m. Eastern right here on ABC News Live. In the meantime, coming up, what we are learning about the capture of a top ISIS leader in a dramatic U.S.-led military raid in Syria. That's when we come back. Welcome back. Turning now to the capture of that top ISIS leader in Syria, said to be an experienced bomb maker and a facilitator. It is just the latest operation from U.S.-led forces working to dismantle the terror group's command structure. Chief White House correspondent Cecilia Vega with more. Cecilia.
U.S. officials say that while ISIS is not as strong as it once was, it does still remain an active threat. Here's what we know right now about this raid. He is one of the top ISIS leaders in Syria. His name is Hani Ahmed al-Kurdi. Officials say he was an experienced bomb maker and facilitator. He was actively planning ISIS operations. U.S.-led coalition forces capturing him during this rare military operation in northwestern Syria yesterday. They say no civilians were harmed or damage sustained to U.S. resources during this raid, and international observers on the ground there say 2 helicopters landed in a village about 2 miles from the Turkish border, with coalition forces chasing down these gunmen. This is the second major raid against ISIS under President Biden. U.S. Special Forces, of course, you'll remember, attempted to kill or capture the group's leader back in February, but he detonated a suicide vest, killing himself and several other family members. But in this case, al-Kurdi was captured alive. Phil, that makes him a potentially very valuable asset for U.S. coalition forces, potentially someone who could offer a lot of information about ISIS and its terrorist network around the world.
More to come on that. Cecilia, thank you so much. Now to the major development in the battle against COVID. Children as young as 6 months of age could have access to vaccines as early as next week. An FDA panel yesterday recommended emergency use authorization for COVID shots from both Moderna and Pfizer for kids under 6 years old. ABC News medical contributor and emergency physician Dr. Darian Sutton joins me now for more. Doctor, thanks so much. This authorization makes 18 million kids eligible for COVID shots. How important is getting the country's youngest vaccinated, something that parents all across this country have been waiting for, especially as COVID cases continue to rise?
It's crucial. It's crucial for stepping out of this pandemic and stepping into our new normal. And the threat still exists, although the risk for harm for children and adolescents is less than that comparative to adults. We have seen more than, and specifically in this age group, more than 30,000 hospitalizations and more than 400 deaths, making COVID more harmful for children under 5 than any outbreak of the flu in the last decade. So it's absolutely necessary.
So Florida right now, as we know, is the only state that has not pre-ordered COVID-19 vaccinations for kids under 5. So 2 questions here. What kind of implication can that have on children there who won't be getting it, presumably? And then does this have any larger impact on vaccine distribution as a whole?
I think it certainly slows down vaccine distribution, of course. I think it's a mistake and a disservice to the community. Every single day I'm treating patients, I'm talking to parents about who are awaiting these vaccines, and I can only imagine the frustration and the anxiety that those parents in Florida have. I think it's necessary to prepare for the future, because if we look at prior surges, most recently, for example, data from the most recent Omicron variant shows that children under 5 were hospitalized at 5 times the rate than they were during the Delta surge. And now we have these looming threats of possible surges during the fall, and I think we need to do everything we can to prepare for that.
As I mentioned just a little bit earlier, Doctor, the FDA granted authorization for these vaccines, but what needs to happen next before kids can actually get shots in arms?
Well, after the formal FDA approval, as we always have seen, we'll await the CDC Advisory Committee to make decisions on how best to administer the vaccine and to provide it to communities. And then after that, we'll await the formal CDC director's decision. And we may have vaccines available to this age group as early as next week.
So public health experts say low levels of testing in Texas may be hiding a COVID wave there. What does this mean for testing overall? Isn't that kind of the future of testing as we move forward?
I do think that this is going to be likely what we'll see in the future as more people are testing at home. There's less of a centralized process. It makes it very difficult, to be honest with you, from a public health standpoint. When we see these test results, we use them to understand how best to staff hospitals and prepare for resources for possible surges. And so now that we're seeing this decrease in access to testing and also overall testing, it makes us concerned. We try and use other variables such as hospitalization rates as well as wastewater analysis, but using all variables is probably the most helpful and easiest for public health. So I'm hopeful that in the future, we'll have a more standardized, centralized, and transparent process where we can all see these numbers and make predictions.
All right, Dr. Darian Sutton, thank you so much.
Of course.
Coming up next, operations halted again for the troubled plant at the center of the nationwide baby formula shortage, this time because of powerful storms. What it means for parents. Welcome back to ABC News Live. Less than 2 weeks after a critical Abbott baby formula production plant reopened in Michigan following contamination concerns, operations there have been halted yet again. Abbott says a powerful storm brought torrential rain to the area, causing parts of that plant to flood. The company says it now has to assess the damage, clean up, and resanitize. In a statement, Abbott says this likely will delay production and distribution of new product for a few weeks amid the nationwide baby formula shortage. The suspected shooter in the Buffalo supermarket massacre appeared in court today for arraignment on 26 new federal hate crime charges. Authorities say he specifically targeted black victims in a shooting that left 10 dead. The complaint, which includes 10 murder charges, makes the 18-year-old suspected shooter eligible for a possible death sentence if convicted. The federal magistrate urged prosecutors to quickly decide whether to seek the death penalty. Kevin Spacey was granted bail at his first court appearance in London today after being charged with 5 offenses, including 4 counts of sexual assault. Spacey's lawyer told the court the 62-year-old actor strenuously denies all of the allegations. And cosmetic giant Revlon has voluntarily filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The 90-year-old company buckled under debt it had built up in an attempt to compete with online upstarts. The company said today that the filing will allow it to continue to run its business while refinancing. The ongoing debate over migrants arriving at our nation's southern border is a tenuous one, but a program launched by Governor Abbott, known as Operation Lone Star, is using state resources to allegedly bring safety and control back to Texas. ABC's Maria Villarreal has details on the impact this policy is having, starting with the migrants seeking asylum.
Grocery shopping.
Patatas, la famosa patata.
Museum hopping.
La Virgen Morena.
And a nature walk. It's the little things Gaston appreciates these days, but nothing comes close to video chats with his wife and children back home.
Chao, Dios la bendiga. Chao, chao.
Gaston says he's living in the U.S. alone, risking death threats while working as a human rights lawyer in Venezuela, a country plagued with political corruption, high unemployment, and severe economic issues.
Que mi miedo es creíble. Mi miedo era ese, mi miedo era que no estuviera preso, que no pudiera socorrer a mi familia, que no los viera y que me pasara algo, como le ha pasado a muchísimas personas.
Gaston explains he spent years defending political opponents of Venezuela's Nicolás Maduro's regime, mostly students jailed for speaking out against the government.
En Venezuela era un abogado en ejercicio, dedicado a la defensa de los estudiantes. Defendíamos de manera gratuita sus intereses judiciales, al punto de llevarlos a libertad por las malas prácticas que hacía el régimen contra estas personas solamente por su disidencia.
Gaston worried it was only a matter of time before he ended up in a cell himself. He fled Venezuela, making his way to the U.S.-Mexico border to seek asylum in the United States. He swam across the Rio Grande hoping to surrender to U.S. border officials, but instead, he was arrested by troopers with the Texas Department of Public Safety.
Yo le presenté mis credenciales, mira, yo soy abogado, aquí está mi credencial, y lo único que me dijo fue, te tengo que detener, coloca las manos atrás.
Gaston says what followed was 33 days of hell.
Te puedo decir que es la discriminación más terrible que puede sufrir un ser humano privado de su libertad.
In a statement to ABC News, the Texas Department of Criminal Justice says they've worked with the Texas Commission on Law Enforcement and the Texas Commission on Jail Standards to ensure identified state facilities meet state standards to hold pretrial confinees and post-conviction inmates.
Gaston spent 5 weeks, and that's actually on the low end. We've had clients that have spent months in those prisons awaiting trials, months in those prisons unable to afford bond. And these are people that are not criminals.
Kristen Eaton represented Gaston's case against the state once he was detained.
The current federal law authorizes somebody to do exactly what Gaston did, which was to come across the river and seek asylum. And so we have clients all over the country, again, that are here and able to apply for asylum and wait in the United States.
Gaston is just one of thousands of migrants who have been kept in detention centers like this one, using Operation Lone Star, a Texas-run border security initiative created by Governor Greg Abbott.
Texas will be taking its own unprecedented actions this month to do what no state in America has ever done in the history of this country to better secure our state as well as our nation.
In May of last year, Abbott filed a disaster declaration based on the influx of migrant traffic in Texas that covers 48 Texas counties, 32 of them along the border. The declaration leading to the creation of Operation Lone Star.
I got you.
A program where an estimated 10,000 soldiers from the Texas National Guard and Department of Public Safety are being used for immigration patrols in addition to federal agents.
Texas has essentially militarized the border to make apprehensions and arrests, primarily of migrants, for criminal trespass offenses.
Governor Abbott says the program is intended to stop smugglers. Since the federal government, not states, has the power to enforce immigration law, Texas troopers can only make arrests if migrants trespass on a private property.
Allí no había ningún aviso que dijera que eso era propiedad privada, ni que yo haya tumbado una pared, ni haya penetrado una cerca.
According to the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, to date the program has made just over 4,100 total trespassing arrests.
We have clients that are arrested multiple times for criminal trespass. They're released and they come back. There's really no deterrent value in these criminal trespass prosecutions at all.
The strategy of expelling migrants does not appear to have slowed immigration, but the price tag of funding the operation continues to go up, with Texas taxpayers fronting the cost.
Texas has spent more than $4 billion on Operation Lone Star. That is a lot of money that is being spent, that is being taken away from other areas of need in Texas.
In late April, nearly $500 million in additional funding was approved by Governor Abbott and state leadership for the operation. While Gaston's asylum case moves through the federal courts, he's hoping that he can one day make a living for himself in the U.S. and support his family back home.
Por milagro de Dios, ha querido que mi vida continúe, que ayude a los míos, que ayude a mi familia, que ayude a mi país y que de una u otra manera pues, permanezcamos aquí en Estados Unidos a pesar de todas esas diferencias y todos esos acontecimientos que han pasado. Gracias a Dios no me ha ido mal.
Maria Villarreal continuing to cover the border and immigration for us. Maria, thank you. I'm Phil Lipoff. Stay with us as ABC News Live continues with more news, context, and analysis.
Hi everyone, George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.